You know that feeling when things finally start going well and something inside you gets uncomfortable. The job is good. The relationship is calm. No crisis on the horizon. And yet, there is this quiet restlessness. This low hum of anxiety that something must be wrong. That peace is somehow suspicious. So you pick a fight, or you spiral into old memories, or you find a reason to believe it will all fall apart. And then almost instantly, you feel something strange. Relief. Not because things got worse, but because the suffering felt familiar. And familiar, for your nervous system, has always meant safe. This is not weakness. This is not self-destruction. This is your emotional architecture doing exactly what it was built to do, protect you by keeping you inside the world it already knows. Today, we are going to go somewhere most people are too afraid to look. Not at your habits, not at your patterns, but at the part of you that is quietly, unconsciously, addicted to your own suffering, and the terrifying reason why letting it go feels more dangerous than holding on. There is a version of you that wants to heal. You have read the books. You have started the journals. You have said, this time will be different, more times than you can count. And yet here you are, still circling the same pain, still returning to the same thoughts at 2 a.m., still somehow finding your way back to the exact emotional state you swore you were done with. People around you call it self-sabotage. Therapists call it repetition compulsion. But neither of those phrases touches the real truth. The real truth is this. Your suffering is not your enemy. It is your oldest friend. And you do not abandon old friends just because someone tells you to. Let us go back. Not to last year. Not to your last relationship. Further, go back to the first time the world felt unpredictable. Maybe it was a parent whose love came with conditions. Maybe it was a home where tension lived in the walls, and you learned to read the room before you could even read words. Maybe it was the slow, quiet realization that being too happy, too loud, too much always seems to invite some kind of collapse. Your child mind, which was brilliant, did something remarkable. It created a map of what the world feels like, what love feels like, what safety feels like. And because children learn through repetition, that map was drawn in the ink of whatever was most consistent, even if what was most consistent was chaos, emotional distance, or pain. Psychologists call this schema formation. Jung called it the construction of the psyche. But what it really is the moment your nervous system decided what normal was supposed to feel like. And normal felt like tension. Normal felt like waiting for something to go wrong. Normal felt like earning love rather than receiving it. Normal felt like suffering had a purpose. Because in your world, it often did. It kept you alert. It kept you prepared. It kept you alive inside an unpredictable environment. That was not dysfunction. That was genius. The tragedy is you never got the memo that the environment changed. Here is where it gets deeper. The human brain has a structure called the reticular activating system. It acts like a filter, scanning your reality and highlighting what it already believes to be true. If your internal map says the world is dangerous, it will find danger. If your map says love always ends in abandonment, it will notice every small sign of withdrawal and ignore every sign of security. But beyond neuroscience, there is something even more primal at work. Dopamine, the chemical most people associate with pleasure, is not actually released during pleasure. It is released during the anticipation of a reward. And here is the part that will reframe everything. Your brain has learned to anticipate relief from suffering, not joy. Relief. The moment the bad thing finally happens, the argument you were waiting for, the rejection you predicted, the failure that confirmed what you already believed about yourself, there is a neurochemical release. A settling, a strange, hollow peace. Because the waiting is over. Because the story made sense. Because your map was right. And the brain, above all things, loves to be right. It will sacrifice your happiness to maintain the integrity of its own narrative. Every single time. Freud saw this in his patients over 100 years ago. He called it the repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate early emotional experiences. Not because we enjoy them, but because they feel like home. Nietzsche, in his own way, called it amor fati, though he meant it as a challenge, an invitation to love your fate rather than be imprisoned by it. Most people never reach that level of conscious embrace. They simply repeat. They return to suffering the way you return to a childhood home that never treated you well, because at least you know where everything is. Now, we need to talk about identity. This is the part no one wants to hear. At some point, your suffering stopped being something that happened to you. It became something you were. You became the person who always struggles, the one who attracts the wrong people, the one who can never quite catch a break, the one who tries so hard, but always ends up in the same place. And that identity, painful as it is, became your anchor. Because identity, even a painful one, gives you something invaluable: predictability, coherence, a story that explains your life. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we bury because they feel too dangerous, too shameful, or simply too complex to integrate. But there is another shadow most people never examine: the shadow of a suffering identity. The quiet, unconscious belief that without the pain, you do not know who you are. If you are not the one who struggles, who are you? If your story does not include the wound, what is left of the story? This is not philosophical abstraction. This is lived experience. Ask yourself, when you imagine a version of yourself that is fully healed, fully at peace, fully free from the cycles that exhaust you, does that image feel exciting? Or does it feel empty? For many people, it feels empty. Or worse, it feels like a loss. Like grief for a self that has been your companion for so long that its absence feels like death. That is not pathology. That is attachment. And you cannot shame yourself out of an attachment. You can only understand it until it loosens. There is also something we need to name directly. Suffering, for many people, has become their most sophisticated form of control. Think about it carefully. When you are in pain, you have a reason for not trying, a reason for not risking, a reason for not stepping into the version of your life that terrifies you more than the familiar dark. Because failure when you were trying, really trying, is unbearable. But suffering when you were never quite okay to begin with, that is a story with an exit. That is a wound with a villain. That is a life with an explanation. Psychologists call this secondary gain, the hidden benefit embedded inside a painful pattern. It is not conscious manipulation. It is emotional architecture doing what it was designed to do: managing threat, minimizing exposure. Your suffering has been protecting you from something scarier than itself. And the thing it has been protecting you from most is hope. Because hope requires vulnerability. Hope means you opened yourself to a possibility you cannot control. And for someone whose early emotional map taught them that opening leads to being hurt, hope is not comfort. Hope is the most dangerous feeling in the world. So the nervous system does the logical thing. It kills hope early. It manufactures suffering before suffering can arrive as a surprise. It self-destructs before the world gets the chance to. That is not self-hatred. That is preemptive armor. It is a shield built by a child who needed it, still being worn by an adult who no longer does, but who never learned how to take it off without feeling completely exposed. Let us talk about the loop itself. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It starts with a trigger. Something good happens, or is about to happen. A new beginning, a moment of genuine peace. And then the inner chaos activates. A thought creeps in. This will not last, or you do not deserve this, or simply a formless dread. No words, just a tightening in the chest, a background hum of wrongness. Then comes the behavior, the picking of a fight, the retreat into old memories, the consumption of content that confirms your worst beliefs about yourself, the reaching out to someone who you know will disappoint you, the quiet but intentional dismantling of the good thing. Then comes the familiar pain, and then the relief, and your brain logs it. Suffering worked. Suffering was the path back to ground, and the loop tightens. Each cycle reinforces the neural pathway. Each return to pain makes the path smoother, faster, more automatic, until one day you are not choosing suffering consciously. You are simply arriving there the way you arrive at home after a long drive, without remembering a single turn. This is what addiction researchers call behavioral entrenchment. The pattern does not continue because it feels good. It continues because the alternative, the unknown of a life without this particular pain, requires the brain to build an entirely new map. And map making is exhausting. Map making requires sitting in disorientation, and disorientation, to a nervous system built on hypervigilance, feels like danger. So it returns to what it knows, not because you are broken, but because you are human. And humans, above all things, are creatures of the familiar. Here is the philosophical turn. Nietzsche wrote that what does not kill us makes us stronger. But the more honest version, the one he lived, was something closer to: what does not kill us becomes the story we build our entire existence around. The wound becomes the worldview. The pain becomes the lens. And viewed through that lens, everything confirms the original suffering. Every kind person is hiding something. Every moment of joy is borrowed time. Every chance at a different life is either a trap or a test. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote about the absurdity of the human condition, the way we keep searching for meaning in a universe that offers none on its own. But suffering offers the illusion of meaning. Suffering feels significant. Suffering feels like it is building towards something: a lesson, a transformation, a reason. Joy, on the other hand, just is. And for a mind trained on meaning through pain, joy without a price tag feels false. This is the deepest layer of the addiction, not the neuroscience, not the childhood wound, but the metaphysical need for your life to mean something, and the unconscious decision, it's somewhere in the dark, that meaning lives on the other side of suffering, and so the suffering must continue while the meaning is earned. So where does this leave you? Not with a list, not with 5 steps to heal your inner child and reprogram your nervous system before breakfast. With something more honest than that. With the radical understanding that you are not broken. You are loyal. Loyal to a map that kept you alive. Loyal to an identity that gave you coherence when everything else was chaos. Loyal to a story that, for a long time, was the only story that made sense of the world you lived in. The question is not how to stop suffering. The question is, what would you have to believe about yourself, about the world, and about what you deserve if you decided the old map was no longer the territory? Because you are not the same person who drew it. The child who learned that tension meant love, that pain meant significance, that chaos meant home, that child was doing their absolute best with an impossible set of conditions. But you are here now, and here is different. The suffering that once protected you is now the ceiling above your life. Not a villain, not a flaw, a ceiling, a limit that once kept you from falling that now keeps you from rising. And the first step toward anything new is not healing. It is simply seeing the loop for what it is, seeing the armor for what it is, seeing the addiction, not with shame, but with the quiet, unflinching recognition of someone who finally understands why they became who they became. That recognition changes something, slowly, not all at once, but it begins a different kind of map making, one drawn not in the ink of survival, but in something rarer, in the ink of choice. So here's the question that will stay with you long after this ends. Not, how do I heal, but something older and more honest than that. What are you still getting from your suffering that you are too afraid to admit? Sit with that, not to judge yourself, but because the answer, if you are willing to find it, is the beginning of the most important conversation you will ever have with yourself. Which truth in this hit the hardest for you? The idea that your brain is addicted to the relief that follows pain? Or the possibility that your suffering has become the identity you are most afraid to lose? Let that answer surface on its own. It already knows.